Well, as a birthday present, my friend so kindly gifted me the Inbetweeners USA. And you know what this means? However, for this part I wanted to take a bit of an alternative view. We've already highlighted so much of what the remake did horribly wrong, but is there anything that it actually did right? No. Okay, I'm kidding. A big part of adapting a show for an American audience is changing it to suit a new audience and purpose. The American Office is a great example of this. In season 1 they stuck rigidly to the format and tone of the original, however by the time they made season 2 they realised a more light-hearted and eccentric tone suited the adaptation far more. Also, I kinda made a whole video on that topic, so you should probably go check that out. This is where one of the problems with the American Inbetweeners shows the most. They tried to make the show more cinematic and dramatised, but they almost never went far enough and instead got stuck in an awkward middle ground. So, what happens when the American Inbetweeners is allowed to embrace a more dramatised tone? Case in point, the episode simply titled Fire, a completely original story that sees the show embracing a far more eccentric plot with much sillier humour. The episode follows Will, who manages to save the school from one of the scariest fires you'll ever see, and as a result is hailed as a hero. However, since he was the first person at the scene of the fire, he immediately becomes the primary suspect, so it's up to him to figure out what caused the fire so that he can free his name. The episode has over-the-top lighting, sound effects, camera work, and even music. But you know what? It's kind of refreshing. After god-awful PG rehashes of our favourite moments, it's great to finally see the series come up with its own ideas. Now, okay, the episode still isn't really funny, but it's not painful, and it even has one of the only jokes in the series that actually made me laugh.
I guess I know what it feels like to be a hero now.
I thought he was sick. He is.
This trend of embracing the outlandish is one thing that really helps the later episodes of the series. For example, in the adaptation of the school trip episode, we see our characters head out to a tacky Civil War reenactment centre that doesn't take itself too seriously, and as part of this we get one line and one visual joke that I actually think is somewhat amusing, and is helped by the dramatised nature of the remake.
This whole recreation thing is a farce. Half the people are dressed as Germans. I think I saw Darth Maul out there.
This episode also introduces a plot point that I actually really like. During the field trip, Jay encounters a girl who he begins to form a romantic connection with, only to find out she's just 13. However, he still decides to go ahead with the relationship despite this, and it gives him some of the best lines of the series.
What do you guys think if I were to, I don't know, hypothetically ask out a 7th grader, right? It wouldn't be that crazy, because when she's 73, I'd be 75.
It was my fault. I took advice from a guy now dating a 13-year-old.
So you do think it's okay?
Now, this joke is similar to another we see in the UK show, where they try to speak to a group of girls who turn out to be 13.
Hi there.
What'd you fucking say?
Hello?
And what?
I wanted to ask you to a party.
I'm 13.
Oh, right.
And she's 11, you nonce.
However, whilst the UK original ends the joke with a hilarious and cringy conclusion, the American show builds upon the idea and turns it into something new. Another thing worth noting is that the characters in the American series are supposed to be 15 and 16, whereas in the UK show they are between 17 and 19. This obviously makes this encounter
Like looking at little girls, do ya? Like getting them to go to parties with ya where you can touch them, do ya?
a little more painful, and this encounter
You're amazing.
a little easier to swallow. The conclusion to this relationship is fitting, though in the end, all it really does is make me wish the UK writers had handled a plot like this, as it's ultimately slightly uneventful. Some other parts I liked from the American version included Will suffering from travel sickness, which felt like a very fitting personality trait, the over-the-top character of Jono, the Australian carpenter helping Neil's dad,
Sometimes it sticks.
occasionally nailing the cringe humour, like in this scene, Lauren from the school trip episode playing a much bigger part, and finally a story in which Will plans to protest the library they just had installed, but instead does a complete 180 just to try and impress a girl. Ultimately, the American version did begin to learn, and whilst it wasn't particularly amazing, it did at least demonstrate self-awareness of the writers. An American version of the Inbetweeners probably could work. A cough! Cough! But this attempt just wasn't it. But I know what you're really here for. let's tear apart more of this shit show. One of the biggest bastardizations that I wanted to mention has to be this scene. I'm sure everyone can recall the painful scene in which a drunk Will accidentally convinces Carly's brother that his parents are dead. And once again we return to the age-old problem that the US version lacks build-up. In the original, the conversation is initiated by the wide-eyed curiosity of Carly's brother,
What's a dirty bomb?
as Will then proceeds to answer him with absolutely no filter as to what may actually be disturbing.
Oh, it's just a big nuclear bomb that terrorists would use to kill everyone in London.
Then the scene cuts back to Simon and Carly, and the face Simon makes here is funnier than every single episode of the US Inbetweeners. After some conversation, we cut back to Will and Chris, and Will makes this comment.
Oops, there goes the tallest building in London. That'll be a few thousand dead.
By cutting away, we get the impression that a certain amount of time has passed where they have both been watching the disturbing recreation on TV, and I like to imagine that Will has been making similar comments throughout this time. Then we get the question.
My mum and dad are in London tonight. Would they be killed?
And Will's delivery of these two lines is perfect.
Oh yes, not only killed but obliterated. Merely a scorched shadow on the pavement. Dust.
It's like Will is almost getting enjoyment out of describing Chris's parents as dead in his drunken state, and that of course causes Chris to cry out,
Dead forever.
My mummy! My daddy!
No.
Mummy! Mummy!
It's a perfect example of painful British humour. The US version, on the other hand, is terrible. The build-up has pretty much gone entirely, as they decide to condense each of these scenes down into one.
Oh, I've seen this one. It's about what would happen if a chemical bomb hit the city. The streets would pile up with corpses, stacked up on the curb like recycle bins.
My parents are in this city. Would they be killed?
Yep, stacked up on a curb.
My mom and dad are dead?
What?
Not only that, but the dialogue is cut down dramatically with a far worse delivery. Just listen to the difference here.
Yep, stacked up on a curb.
Oh yes, not only killed but obliterated. Merely a scorched shadow on the pavement. Dust.
I think the final blow is that the child performance in the UK version sounds far younger and more innocent in comparison to the American actor, which really sells the scene.
My mum and dad are in London tonight. Would they be killed? My parents are in this city. Would they be killed? So they are dead forever.
Yep, dead forever.
My mummy! My daddy! My mom and dad are dead?
What?
It's a poor, rushed adaptation of a great joke. Another painful scene I want to talk about is actually a completely original one, but it demonstrates the completely childish humour of the series. As we have established, the American Will gets travel sick, and because of this he wears this magnet wrist thingy to help calm it down. However, when sitting next to Lauren on the journey home, she asks if she can borrow it, and wanting to win her over, he lets her take it. And this results in Will getting severely travel sick and rushing to the toilet, where he proceeds to vomit over absolutely everything, including himself, and then walk out into the bus in just his underwear. Ha ha. No. First of all, Will clearly could have just kept vomiting into the toilet and avoided drenching fucking everything. And secondly, what kind of childlike sense of humour do you have to find any of this remotely funny? It's over the top and gratuitous, and a terrible attempt at cringe humour. Finally, another place where the American version misses the mark is the classic briefcase wanker joke.
Briefcase wanker.
In the UK version, the quote is memorable because of how they presented it. First of all, there's the setup.
He's got an actual briefcase.
Then there's the scene in which Will is taunted throughout the school, which ends in our beloved phrase,
Briefcase wanker.
Another thing I love here are the sarcastic retorts that Will gives under his breath. It perfectly shows what kind of person he is.
Nice badge, dickhead.
Lovely, fantastic. You must be what, year 8?
Finally, the show calls back to it twice in the rest of the episode, which cements it in our mind.
Oh, briefcase.
Briefcase mong.
The parts where Will walks through the school having abuse hurled at him are honestly some of the best parts of the series. So, how exactly does the American adaptation handle this?
It's a messenger bag.
Oh, is it delivering the message my mom dressed me?
Oh, is it delivering the message my mom dressed me?
Fuck this show.